And welcome back to another podcast with Mr. Hagan. And on this podcast, we're going to continue looking at public goods. And on this podcast, we're going to do some examples of how to identify what type of goods different goods might be, how they might fit into our goods matrix. So what I've done here is I've kind of mixed the matrix around a little bit. So this is a little bit different than the box that I did on, or the matrix that I did on a previous video. The way I'm going to do it on this one is I'm going to have perfectly rivalrous over here on this end on the horizontal axis, and over here will represent perfectly non-rivalrous goods. And then on the vertical axis, I have perfectly excludable down here at the bottom and perfectly non-excludable up here toward the top. And then I'm just going to put these lines in here to say we're going to split the box like this. We're going to split the box like this, like we did before. And so then we can label the different parts of the box. So, for example, right here, if a good is perfectly excludable and perfectly rivalrous, or at least somewhat excludable and somewhat rivalrous, then this box right here is going to be a private good. That's going to be a private good. It's going to be a private good. And then up here in this corner, this is going to be the other extreme, and that's going to be a good that is both non-excludable and non-rivalrous. So that good is going to be a public good. Those goods are going to be public goods, and we did say this all before on some previous videos. Up here on the upper left, this is going to be perfectly rivalrous, or I shouldn't say perfectly, but could be pretty rivalrous and non-excludable. Those goods are going to be called common resources. So those are going to be common resources. And then finally down here is going to be the non-rivalrous but excludable. Those are natural monopolies. And we're not going to, as I said before, we're not going to worry about those natural monopolies. We're not going to worry about natural monopolies on this playlist. So we're going to be really worried about these three boxes, although we're going to have some items that are going to fall in here potentially, but we're not going to spend a lot of time analyzing this. We're going to worry about analyzing these. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go through these goods that are over here, and I'm going to label those goods where I think they go on this matrix and just kind of show you how to think about this. So let's start with a pair of jeans. What would I do with a pair of jeans? A pair of jeans, I'd put them down here, private good, somewhere down here. Jeans are mostly excludable. That is to say, when a company produces a pair of jeans, they can exclude you from walking out of the store with them if you don't pay for them, by and large. And somebody could steal a pair or something, but they're mostly excludable, and they're also very rivalrous. That is to say, think about it this way: if you can hold it, if you can touch it, then it's probably rivalrous, right? If I'm wearing a pair of jeans, then you're not wearing them, and so that makes the good rivalrous. If I'm using it, you can't be, right? You can still have your own pair of jeans, but not my pair of jeans. And remember, that's from previous videos. That's the way you want to think about it. If I am using a product, can you also use that same product? If I'm wearing a pair of jeans, you're not. That makes it rivalrous. So that's where I would put jeans. National defense is at the other extreme. I would put national defense up here. National defense is mostly non-excludable and mostly non-rivalrous. That is to say, once the government provides national defense, and I'm going to think about it this way, so I'm going to get rid of that. I'm going to think about it this way. Think about like if we had an anti-missile defense system over top of a country. Well, once that national, let's say a private company provided that, if a private company paid for by wealthy benefactors in the country that want to protect themselves, if they put up an anti-missile defense system, once they do that, they can't exclude other people that live in that area from enjoying it. If their anti-missile defense system blows up a bomb that was heading towards a certain region, people in the region who didn't pay for it, who are free riders, they're still going to benefit. So it's mostly non-excludable. It's also non-rivalrous, right? If people get the benefit of being protected from the bomb, that doesn't prevent other people from also being protected. So it is non-rivalrous in consumption, and so we tend to call national defense a public good. Clean air, I think I probably would put clean air up here as a national defense as well. I think of the city of Pittsburgh back in the 1970s when it was a lot of pollution, and if we were going to imagine that a private company was going to come in and clean up the air, well, once they do that, once some maybe wealthy people pay them to clean up the air, non-payers will still benefit from that. Free riders can still benefit. And also, if I breathe more clean air, it doesn't really take away from you breathing the clean air. And by the way, we might be able to think of some examples where clean air might become a private good down here. That might be like if instead of cleaning the air outside, maybe companies clean the air inside of buildings with filtration systems, and so there's dirty air on the outside, but if you pay to get on the inside, which is excludable, then you can be inside and you can breathe the clean air. I'm not sure that that's a moral thing to do. Maybe we could debate that, but that would be a technology that could move clean air more towards here, right? Could do it. I'm not saying that we should. Education. I think of education as being excludable. That is to say, we can lock the doors to the school, and if you don't pay, you don't get in. We don't lock the doors in public schools in the United States. But we could exclude non-payers. We could do that. And let's see, I'm going to say, is it rivalrous or non-rivalrous? I'm going to put education maybe just about right here in the middle. On some level, it's non-rivalrous. If one more student comes into my classroom and I go from having 25 students to 26 students in a class, that probably really doesn't take away from other people's education. But on the other hand, if you have a lecture hall with 300 people, well, that's going to start taking away from the ability of students to ask questions and things like that, and so it would get rivalrous. And so I guess it just kind of depends. Maybe it's somewhere in here. I'm going to say education is excludable, and rivalrous, non-rivalrous, we could kind of debate that. Depends on the circumstances. All right, radio and TV. I'm going to kind of do these two together. I'll do radio first, and then we'll match up TV with it because they're very similar. So first of all, I would say radio maybe used to be up here as a public good. Radio would be somewhere up here as a public good. And why do I say that? Well, if a private radio station provided radio services, then once they send out their signal, they can't exclude non-payers. And in addition to that, if I listen to the radio more, it doesn't take away from you listening to the radio, so it tends to be non-rivalrous. However, this could change. This has changed over time by the way, so I should say, so governments, they would provide radio services. In the United States, we had NPR, National Public Radio, and that was a government-run radio. So now what has happened recently is we could have radio like Sirius Radio. That's a radio that you have to pay to get the service, you have to pay to listen, and if you don't pay, then they scramble the signal. You can't hear it. Or maybe the online radio stations, they can say that you have to pay to listen, things like that. So we now have technologies that might be causing radio to start to move down here. It's still non-rivalrous. I listen to a pay-for radio station more. It doesn't take away from you being able to listen to it, but they can now exclude me. And so we've taken radio and maybe moved it down to here. And I'm going to say the same thing is true with television. So television programming, we'll put it up here. Television programming. We have, of course, public television in the United States, and that's the government providing it because it was non-excludable and non-rivalrous for the exact same reasons as radio. But with cable television, it is now starting to become excludable, and so it's starting to move down here. So changes in technology can change goods that were once public goods to something more like a natural monopoly and solve the excludable problem. It can solve the excludability problem. All right, last one to think about is computer software. I think computer software, it depends how you think about it. If you think about in the old days where you had to go to a computer store and buy a disk, well, a disk that had software on it, that was excludable. And if I had the disk, you didn't have it. It was rivalrous. And so I would have said that it was down here. It was a private good. However, now what happens is maybe I just download the software, so there's no disk anymore, and I think that means it's still excludable. A company could still exclude me by making me give their credit card online before they will allow me to download their software, but it now becomes non-rivalrous. So I would say that it would now be non-rivalrous and move over here because now I download all I want. It doesn't take away from your ability to download. So my point in saying this is when we think about a chart like this, we got to think about two things. One, that I have to be able to defend my position. I have to be able to explain why I labeled something where I labeled it. And then number two, I also want to think about or accept the reality that some of these change over time. Whether something's a private good or a natural monopoly or a public good, that changes over time. And I think it would be fair to say, if you notice where these arrows were pointing, computer software used to be disks that you would buy, and now it's moved to downloading. So all these arrows are kind of moving over here into the natural monopoly, and I think some of the digital revolution is doing that. There's new technologies. That'd be a better way to say it. New technologies are causing some things that used to be private goods and public goods to look more like natural monopolies. All right, so that's just a couple examples of some different goods. I hope that helps you to think about how to define and label a good. This has been Mr. Hagan on another podcast. Thanks for joining me, and we'll see you on the next podcast.